All right, fellas, let's talk a little betting now. Obviously, a lot of gambling storylines going into the draft. We've talked about it on this show. We gave out draft odds, what we were leaning towards, all of those things. Let's talk about maybe some of the things that happened. Like, for one, the sports books absolutely cleaned up on Levis props. There was that anonymous Reddit user that posted that he was going to go number one overall. Look at these. I was just reading this article. Look at this. At BetMGM, Levis closed as the most bet number one overall with 29% of the handle. At PointsBet, he had 25% of the handle. DraftKings, someone felt so strongly about this. They threw down $2,000 at plus 1,000 odds. Would have won them $20,000. The point of this is, like, don't get conned. Listen to the draft analysts. Don't listen to Reddit and random people posting on there. But I thought this was just so interesting at how volatile this process can be with betting, and the public got hosed on this.
Well, not only that, this has been, I think, unlike other drafts where at least there was one clear-cut number one overall pick. This was a merry-go-round in terms of odds, whether it was Bryce Young. It eventually ended up going back to Bryce Young, but it started with Bryce Young, went to Anthony Richardson, it went to C.J. Stroud, and then some Reddit dudes talking about Will Levis, and then we go back to Bryce Young. I think the volatility with all that is really what helped the sports books out a little bit. Because if there's, Trevor Lawrence sitting there and you're not even really thinking about anything else there at number one, the rest of the pieces kind of fall into place, I think, a little bit more neatly. But because there was so much volatility, at least, on the outside, whether or not the Carolina Panthers were on Bryce Young from day one and move forward, that's for them to only know. But from the outside, it looked like they were still going through that decision-making process, which, again, is why I think those odds were so crazy.
And to that point, I think it was believable that Bryce Young might not be the first pick because of his size, that he was kind of unprecedentedly small. If they were all 6'2", 220, I think Bryce Young, everyone would have understood, he's going to be the pick. What I thought was funny, and this is not to take a shot at ESPN, but during the draft, as Levis was falling, I think it was getting toward the end of the first round, whatever their model is, it just said per ESPN analytics that Will Levis had a 0.1% chance to not be a first round pick, which to me was mind blowing. And I think that speaks to why Vegas was so happy and they made so much money off all of us thinking maybe he would even go number two overall to the Houston Texans. Ultimately doesn't get picked until the second pick in round two.
And I do think that maybe Houston kind of played it right. And I guess in there, I know they gave him a C here for how much they had to spend for the number 3 overall pick. But I do think the fact that they kind of kept things close to the vest at what they were going to do at number 2, possibly take Will Anderson and just pass on a quarterback entirely. Then when they take the quarterback, all the trade conversations that Arizona was having with all these teams to try to trade up to go get C.J. Stroud go out the window, they swoop in and make that trade. I do think that would have been interesting to see how it would have unfolded if another team traded up at number 3 and took a quarterback. Then maybe Levis goes to 4 to Indianapolis, and then we're having a completely different conversation.
Right, exactly. And to this point, the under 4.5 quarterbacks is what ended up cashing. I think that was probably one of the more popular bets was that over. I think a lot of people thought 5 quarterbacks were going to go in the first round. And we saw 3 go off the board immediately within the top 5 and then not again when Levis and Hendon Hooker goes. Were you guys surprised? And you kind of already touched on this, Sully, that trade kind of changed everything. But were you on that over or under that 4.5 quarterbacks?
Well, I was on the over because I think that teams should value the 5th-year option for these quarterbacks. I think that was the crux of a lot of this conversation. Now, maybe the Hendon Hooker thing was going to be a little bit of a tougher sell, older prospect, coming off an ACL, played in a different type of offense at Tennessee that probably doesn't translate super, super well to the NFL. So that one might have been a stretch. But to me, what I thought was interesting, and Traps, I'd love to get your opinion on this, is that Tennessee traded up in the second round to go get Will Levis. Great value for them. But that was to what? Number 33 overall, if I'm correct. You couldn't have traded to 31 just to get that 5th-year option, that security for that quarterback that you have?
Yeah, I knew that's probably where a lot of people were thinking and where you were going with that. And the Chiefs would certainly have traded down. I mean, Brett Veach has traded back a bunch. He's moved up and down the board. I was thinking that as that was going on, as we were seeing those shots of Will Levis, in the green room, not getting picked, that yes, some team is going to trade up. For Teddy Bridgewater, it happened. Lamar Jackson, it happened. I was really surprised that if Tennessee was hey, he's getting kind of close, and they decided to do it on Friday, they should have really done it on Thursday, traded with either the Eagles or the Chiefs at 30 or 31 to get that super duper valuable fifth-year option.
Yeah. Another interesting one was the over 1.5 running backs cash. I think nobody was really that surprised that Bijan Robinson was selected by the Falcons. He was rumored to be the favorite. It was a little bit surprising that Gibbs went to the Lions, considering they have DeAndre Swift and they have David Montgomery under contract next season. Were you guys surprised to see this over 1.5 running backs cash in the first round?
I can start here. I wasn't shocked because like late in the, I guess I'll say mock draft process, we started to hear some rumblings that Gibbs was maybe going to go like 30 to the Eagles or like 21 to the Chargers, or there was going to maybe be a team, maybe the Bengals, maybe the Vikings at 23, that he was going to go in the first round. And I think with the 4.3 speed, it was believable, and that he was really good on film at Alabama, a marquee program. The fact that it was in the top 12, yes, that was absolutely shocking to me. And I think that kind of speaks for everyone because no one had both of these guys getting selected that early, I don't think.
Yeah, that's the big story, right? It's not that two running backs went in the first round. That could happen in the back end, like you were saying, Traps. But the fact that it happened as high as it did, and the fact that there were two running backs off the board before any wide receiver was taken, I think is one of the bigger upsets of the NFL draft.
Yeah. Well, and that leads me actually into the fact that 4 wide receivers were taken off the board at the same time, or right back to back, because those odds were 3.5. And the fact that it went so quickly, I feel like people were really sweating that one out. Were you guys surprised to see 4 receivers go in a row?
No, because I do think that you see runs on these prospects, right, Traps? It's like, once the tackle market starts going, it goes and it goes quick. Once the wide receiver market starts going, it goes and it goes quick. I think a team that missed out on this was the New York Giants, where I think it was the Seattle Seahawks with Jackson Smith and Jigba, who started the run, and then it ended right before the New York Giants were on the clock. And there was reports from the Athletic saying that they were trying to trade up to get into that run to get Zay Flowers, but they just missed out. Obviously, Flowers going to Baltimore.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. I mean, we had never seen 4 receivers get picked with 4 consecutive selections in draft history. So I guess from that perspective, that was unprecedented. I never fully bought into, like, there was kind of a rumor out there relatively early in the draft process, or I guess it was like right after the combine, that JSN was the only receiver that had a first round grade for a lot of teams. It just felt like even with the lesser workout, Jordan Addison was going to find his way in the first round. Quentin Johnston was on the draft radar for multiple seasons because he's big, he had a 40-inch vertical. It did seem like a class that around where they got picked in the 20s is where they ultimately would go. And it kind of made sense for all those teams that picked the receivers that maybe if it wasn't the Seahawks, like Sully's saying, it would have been the Giants at 25. So there was a cluster of teams from 20 to, I really think, even the Chiefs all the way at the end of the first round at 31 that were all kind of very firmly in the wide receiver market. That was, to me, one that seemed like a lock right before the draft.
Okay, I wish I would have put money on that one. All right, one that kind of surprised me, and we talked about where the books cleaned up on Levis, where bettors got back is the under 2 tight ends in the first round. Only Kincaid ended up going in the first round, which was a surprise to me. That was at plus 285 odds if you cash on this under 2 tight ends. Did you guys think that there would be another tight end called up in the first round?
I did. I mean, I thought whether it was all those or the 2 tight ends that went early in the second, Sam Laporta and Michael Mayer. Kincaid seemed kind of locked in because of how good his final season was at Utah. He did have the injury, but like a week or 2 before the draft, he got cleared. I just felt like maybe even Darnell Washington, who ultimately didn't go until the 4th round, would have fallen. But there was the kind of the opposite school of thought where anyone that bet the under would have said, hey, look, these teams understand how deep this class is and that they can wait. And that's ultimately what most of these teams did.
Yeah, I think I think you hit it right there. I think that that was one of the calling cards for this draft. It was a tight, deep tight end class. And the fact that these teams see that, they go, hey, listen, we're not going to overextend ourselves for somebody because we feel like we can get a similar talent in a couple of picks or a couple of rounds. It's the same thing that we were talking about with running backs. Yes, obviously Bijan Robinson, super talented, but can you get something closer to value later on in the draft as opposed to, missing out on a top tier corner or quarterback? So I think it was kind of that same argument.
What's funny about this, just let me jump in here quick. I love to do this like right after the draft, where if you switch the order that a team picked 2 players, the Lions picked Sam Laporta after trading back at 12. It would have seemed early, but I really, really liked him. I think his yards after the catch is great. Reminds me a lot of George Kittle. If they would have picked him at 12 and then Jahmyr Gibbs at 34, I probably would have liked the draft more. So maybe that kind of speaks to that it is a little bit silly with these draft grades. But that kind of surprised me that we didn't see those tight ends, but we did get Laporta and Michael Mayer off the board very early in the second round.